1995. The O.J. Simpson trial was in full swing. Braveheart with Mel Gibson happened. Alanis Morissette blessed us with her album Jagged Little Pill. Oh, and also this guy was born. And it was also the year that Rent was finally being created for Broadway. It didn't open until January of 1996, but a lot of that work went into it in 1995, and as we know, tragically, Jonathan Larson passed away in 1996, and obviously there was not going to be much fundamental changing of the script at that point. So 1995 is a significant year, but why do I mention it? Well, Rent obviously is a massively, hugely popular musical with good reason. It's got fantastic characters and music, but it was also the first of its kind in many different areas, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm not going to sit here and tell you why Rent is a great musical. We kind of all know that, so that's not what I'm going to do. I'm specifically going to talk about how Rent was so ahead of its time, comparing the morals and the messages of the musical with the cultural values, or perhaps I should say devalues, going on in the country around that time. So before I go any further, I just want to issue a little bit of a trigger warning. I will be talking about real cultural issues, bigotry against LGBTQ people. I'm going to be talking about police brutality. So if any of this stuff is too heavy, then feel free to click away. I won't be offended. The first area where Rent was really spearheading a change in Broadway, it was a rock musical. Now hold on. Yes, I know there were other rock musicals before Rent. Musicals like Hair, Jesus Christ Superstar, Pippin, Grease. But then in the 80s, we get back into the more traditional sound with a lot of Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals, going back to that more orchestraic sound. I have no idea if that's a word or not, but if it isn't, it is now. But in 1996, Rent really changed that by making not just like a rock musical or like a period piece of rock from the past, but a current, modern, almost punky sounding rock music, and it inspired the likes of shows like Spring Awakening, Next to Normal, Bloody Bloody Andrew Jackson, and American Idiot. Now I know this particular point doesn't pertain to like the country. It's not like the country was against rock music at the time. It's more about Broadway. It was really brought back for the first time since like the early 70s. And we're seeing it now with Hamilton as we move more into an R&B hip hop style of music. But now let's move on to some points that are a little bit more culturally relevant and a little more serious. So the second point I want to address is that Rent dealt with drug use. Now it dealt with it in two ways. One way was very short and very tiny little moment, but it was still an important point in the song La Vie Bohème. Collins stands up and says, to marijuana. I just want to address that at the time, marijuana in 1996 had just over 25% approval as far as whether people thought we should legalize it. So that was a tiny little moment, but I just thought it was interesting to mention that. The other much more prevalent way that Rent dealt with drug use was dealing with drug abuse. One of the main characters, Mimi Marquez, was severely addicted to heroin, and she was portrayed as someone who needed help, not a criminal, or for that matter, someone to be laughed at. I'm talking to you, Letterman.
What are they rehabbing, first of all? What is on their list? What are they going to work on when you walk through the door?
In the media in the 1990s, drug addicts, particularly black ones, were portrayed as super predators and thugs.
When you cut on your local news at night, you see black men being paraded across the screen in handcuffs.
They portrayed drug addicts as evil and heartless. The crime bill was signed in 1994 to be tougher on crime, particularly drug-induced crime, and this was an effort by both major political parties at the time. But here in Rent, a drug addict, of color no doubt, is being portrayed as a victim of an illness and is shown in a compassionate light, not shown as some raging lunatic who has no conscience. This kind of representation matters, and it changes the way we view drug abuse. It changes the way you see yourself if you're in that situation, and it changes the way you see other people. So this matters, and it's really important that Rent was able to portray this situation in a way that was accurate, and that's something Rent did really well. The third area in which Rent was extremely ahead of its time was with same-sex couples. So in the show we have two same-sex couples, one with two women, one with two men. So first let's start with Maureen and Joanne. Maureen and Joanne were extremely sexually expressive. Now I want to contrast this with the Angel Collins relationship, where I feel like there's less sexual expressiveness, but I feel like it goes more into the emotional depths of their relationship. One thing I feel like was the case with early same-sex couples in media was they were portrayed kind of like as a joke.
We're not gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, of course not.
I mean, it's fine if that's who you are.
Absolutely.
I mean, I have many gay friends.
My father's gay.
Look,
But what I really like about the relationship and how it's handled in the show is that it's portrayed from a real perspective. The reprise of I'll Cover You is just probably one of my favorite songs in the whole show. I think I talked about that in the video right there. So I just enjoy that the relationship was shown as a real, actual relationship, not just some cartoonic thing to be laughed at. And I feel like it might have been portrayed a little better than Maureen's and Joanne's, which was less emotionally deep. The point is, Rent was really ahead of its time in actually characterizing these people and showing their relationships to be just as valuable as any straight relationship. Now, of course, the hard part, let's contrast that with how gay people were seen and treated in the culture at the time. Now, the 90s were obviously a decade of quite a bit of progress. We have, Ellen DeGeneres coming out. But when you look at with policy and with government, there were so many obvious, horrible injustices going on at the time. In 1993, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was passed as a compromise because not enough Americans wanted gay people to be in the military at the time. In 1995, California Representative Duke Cunningham had this to say about what he thought of gays in the military.
The same people that would vote to cut defense $177 billion, the same ones that would put homos in the military, the same ones that would not fund BRAC, the same ones that would not clear up. No, I will not. Sit down, you socialist.
And in 1996, the Defense of Marriage Act was passed. President Clinton defended the bill in an interview with The Advocate, saying, "I remain opposed to same-sex marriage. I believe marriage is an institution for the union of a man and a woman. This has been my long-standing position, and it is not being reviewed or reconsidered." The Clinton campaign responded to attack ads from then Republican nominee Bob Dole, who said Clinton was creating a moral crisis by releasing ads on Christian radio stations bragging about signing the Defense of Marriage Act. I mean, it just gives you a sense of where we were compared to the message that was being portrayed in Rent. And again, just points to the beauty of Broadway and the beauty of just being a leader and not being afraid to be bold and authentic about what you believe in. And one last thing I want to address, while there are many areas in which Rent was ahead of its time, I think the main thing I want to focus on right here is, again, kind of a smaller moment, but I want to talk about transgender representation. Now, Angel generally is referred to as a man throughout most of the show. Toward the end of the show, after Angel passed away, she is referred to in the female pronoun, and Mark obviously gives that funny, awkward transition where he goes, and he, she, showing kind of a change in his character, which was just this tiny little moment that showed a potential for change in how we see gender identity. Now, bear in mind, transgender was not really a word that the average person, even the well-meaning liberal person, knew, in the 90s at least. Phrases like transvestite or transsexual were used, but transgender was kind of in its infancy as far as the mainstream usage of it. And it wasn't really vernacular used in politics until like the 2010s. Transgender issues to this day are being debated by mostly people who aren't transgender about whether or not they're people, whether or not we should refer to them as their preferred pronouns, whether they have the same rights as cisgendered people. But at the time, Jonathan Larson was bold and he put that moment in to show there will be a time when we change and we see things differently. Jonathan Larson was bold. He was not afraid to stand up to the cultural norms of the time, and I don't think we should either. And I think the moral here is don't be afraid to stand up to the cultural norms of whatever time you live in. Do it today. Because to quote the show, there's no day but today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like. I'm thinking about doing more of these videos where I address a show and see how ahead of its time and how much of a spearhead it was on certain issues. Thinking about doing it with the musical Hair from the late 60s. If you like these kind of videos, let me know in the comments. If you have any disagreements or agreements or points, leave those in the comments. Click subscribe if you enjoy these discussion analysis videos on Broadway theater. And with that said, keep loving theater. I'll see you next time.